Okay. Hello. Let me get myself around here and join our YouTube and let you know what's happening. I'm Greg Penglis, and I am part of the Greg and Donnie News Show team. And I want to do something a little different for you today, as everybody is screaming and yelling over what's going on both sides on the whole Brett Kavanaugh issue, and I guess Dr. Ford, who was making the accusation from way back when. You're all missing the big picture. Okay? And what's really going on that I find fascinating is something happened, and I call these the 7 most important minutes of the Kavanaugh hearing. It wasn't on the news, nobody talked about it, nobody did anything to really highlight this, and I've got it right here. So I'm going to do a little experiment here. I've got my computer, and I've got it all queued up with Senator Lindsay Graham. And he's interviewing Brett Kavanaugh. It's the 3rd day of the hearings. And so it is not just an indictment of Kavanaugh, it's really an indictment of the entire Supreme Court and how they have changed the constitutionality, the separation of powers, the 10th Amendment. They've really screwed around with a lot of our government. And it's not being talked about. And in fact, you look at the sleepy faces behind him, they don't even realize what's going on. So what I think I'll do is play the entire 7 minutes so you get an idea what's happening. Now I want to kind of go back through it with you, but I want you to have one piece, complete for yourself, so that way you can look at this, listen to it, kind of go back on your own and take a look at some of the various parts of what was said. But things to watch for when I start playing this. I want you to listen for the questions are actually more important than the answers. The answers are very sheltered, very couched in I guess, confirmation, legalese, so that nothing really is admitted. But what really happens is that Lindsey Graham systematically indicts the entire Supreme Court, but then doesn't follow it up. Okay, he doesn't follow it up and ask for what he really should ask for, which is basically an entire reform of the Supreme Court so that they don't become supremely powerful, and especially when we get to the section on unlimited authority to create rights from nothing. And there's no check and balance on that. So when we get to the part about the Constitution and what powers the legislature has or should have and doesn't have anymore, watch the faces, watch the expressions, watch everything else, but just listen to this, and then I'll re-cue it up. And I've never done this, so it might be a little bit rough at first, but listen in and carefully and tell me what you think.
Roe v. Wade. You've heard of that case, right?
I have, Senator.
Now, there are a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't. It's an emotional debate in the country. Is there anything in the Constitution about a right to abortion? Is anything written in the document?
Senator, the Supreme Court has recognized the right to abortion since the 1973 Roe v. Wade case. It has reaffirmed it many times.
Look, my question is, did they find a phrase in the Constitution that said that the state cannot interfere with a woman's right to choose until medical viability occurs? Is that in the Constitution?
The Supreme Court applying the liberty...
It's pretty simple. No, it's not, Senator Graham.
Well, I want to...
But those words...
I want to be very careful, because this is a topic on which...
No, if you'll just follow me, I'll let you talk. But the point is, will you tell me, yes or no, is there anything in the document itself talking about limiting the state's ability to protect the unborn before viability? Is there any phrase in the Constitution about abortion?
The Supreme Court has found it under the Liberty Clause, but you're right that specifically...
Is there anything in the Liberty Clause talking about abortion?
The Liberty Clause refers to liberty.
Okay, last time I checked, liberty didn't equate to abortion. The Supreme Court said it did, but here's the point. What are the limits on this concept?
This is key.
You had 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 judges. What are the limits on the ability of the court to find a penumbra of rights that apply to a particular situation? What are the checks and balances of people in your business if you can find 5 people who agree with you to confer a right, whether the public likes it or not, based on this concept of a penumbra of rights? What are the outer limits to this?
The Supreme Court, in the Glucksberg case, which is in the late 90s, Justice Kagan talked about this at her hearing, is the the test that the Supreme Court uses to find unenumerated rights under the Liberty Clause of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, and that refers to rights rooted in the history and tradition of the country, so as to prevent...
So let me ask you this. Is there any right rooted in the history and traditions of the country where legislative bodies could not intercede on behalf of the unborn before medical viability? Is that part of our history?
The Supreme Court precedent has recognized the right to abortion.
I'm just saying, what part of the history of our... I don't think our founding fathers, people mention our founding fathers, I don't remember that being part of American history. So how did the court determine that it was?
The court applied the precedent that existed and found in 1973 that under the Liberty Clause...
Yeah, but before 1970, I mean, when you talk about the history of the United States, the court has found that part of our history is for the legislative bodies not to have a say about protecting the unborn until medical viability. Whether you agree with it or not, I don't think that's part of our history. So, fill in the blank. What are the limits of people in your business applying that concept to almost anything that you think to be liberty?
And that is the concern that some have expressed about the concept of unenumerated rights.
Well, here's the concern I have, that you got one word that has opened up the ability for 5 people to tell everybody elected in the country, you can't go there. That this is an off limits in a democratic process. Whether you agree with Roe v. Wade or not, just think what could happen down the road if 5 people determine the word liberty means X. The only real check and balance is a constitutional amendment to change the ruling. Do you agree with that?
Senator, I'm not going to comment on potential constitutional amendments.
But, okay, if we pass a statute tomorrow in Congress saying that the Congress can regulate abortions before medical liability, wouldn't that fly in the face of Roe v. Wade?
So the Supreme Court has said that a woman has a constitutional right to...
Doesn't that trump a statute?
The Supreme Court precedent...
So all of us could vote. Just 5 people have said liberty means right to... the state has no interest here, compelling interest before medical viability, that we could pass all the laws we want. It doesn't matter because they fall. The only way we can change that is a constitutional amendment process that requires 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the state. Is that a pretty correct legal analysis?
When the Supreme Court has issued a constitutional ruling...
Then you can only change it by constitutional amendment.
That's
So here's the point. Whether you agree with Roe v. Wade or not, the reason some legal scholars object to this concept is breathtakingly unlimited. Whatever 5 people believe at any given time in history in terms of the word liberty, they can rewrite our history and come up with a new history. And I think the best way for democracies to make history is to have the courts interpret the Constitution, be a check and balance on us, but not take one word and create a concept that is breathtaking in terms of its application to restrict the legislative process. Now, whether you agree with me or not, I think there's a genuine debate. And you would agree with me if it was something you liked or you were supporting that got shut out, or you opposed, you couldn't do. So I hope that one day the court will sit down and think long and hard about the path they've charted. And not just about abortion. Whether or not it's right for people in your business, on any given day, based on any given case of controversy, to say that the word liberty, looking at the history of the country and the penumbra of rights, means X. And it shuts out all of us who have gone to the ballot box and gone through the test of being elected. All I ask is that you think about it.
And that was it. Excuse me. That was it. This is monumental. This is earth-shattering. This is the most important discussion that I think I've ever seen in Congress, talking about This senator who goes through a systematic description of how we have lost our rights, how the Congress can't say anything if the Supreme Court has made a, quote, constitutional ruling. Kavanaugh's okay with this. And he's the conservative. This is the part that's the worst of all, is that the liberals, they're even further out creating rights and doing more. So we have the most, allegedly, conservative person before the Supreme Court right now that Trump could appoint, and he's saying that it takes a constitutional amendment to overturn a Supreme Court ruling. That is BS. That is nonsense. That is not how our government works. That is not how any of this was set up. Okay? It goes against the 10th Amendment, for one thing. Power is not reserved to the federal government or reserved to the states. What he's saying is, you know, especially in the Roe v. Wade case, the states have been totally taken out. The 10th Amendment has been completely violated. They have no say in this because this is not an issue, as you heard earlier, that is in the Constitution. So look how Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham, goes through this very systematically. He starts out, is this in the Constitution? Well, no, it's not. But Kavanaugh doesn't say that. He says the Supreme Court has ruled, meaning it doesn't matter what's in the Constitution. He doesn't care because he believes that the Constitution is subordinate to the Supreme Court. And that happened way back, and I've talked about this on my radio show back on WEBY. I talked about this several times. In fact, you go back to the Action Radio podcast page where I spent four days talking about the Supreme Court before these Kavanaugh hearings ever took place, because I wanted to let you know what was going on and get you really in tune with what was happening. Think about this. It's not in the Constitution, but it doesn't matter because the Supreme Court can create any right they want. He just went through that. Kavanaugh's like, yeah, that's true. That's fine. So when he talks about 5 people, he means the 5 judges. So there's a majority of 5, you know, on the court required to make a decision. So you get 9 members of the Supreme Court, 9 justices, all right, who are not elected. They are allegedly, you know, advice and consent by the Senate, nominated by the President. I'll talk about that another day. But the point is that these people who are going for the Supreme Court believe that they have the power to do anything they want, create any right they want, overturn every law they want. I've got speeches of Kavanaugh talking about how it's his job to limit the executive and limit the Congress. He defines what the limits of power are, not the Constitution. He does. And that's the problem. All right, now what I want to do is kind of go back to systematically make all kinds of really obnoxious comments and see if I can get you to think about this. Nobody talked about this. This didn't make the news. In fact, even Senator Graham, after this incredible revelation that the Supreme Court has more authority than the Constitution, than the Congress, than the President, than all the states, unless there is a constitutional amendment of 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the state just to overturn anything the Supreme Court does. That is judicial tyranny. That is the definition of judicial tyranny, and that is what we are fighting against, and that is what we have to overturn. So let's start again. Let me get it queued up here. It's the YouTube, you know, I should probably make the whole thing available, but it's like 8 minutes and 45 seconds in is to where all this nonsense starts. And I'm going to see if I can just, you know, make some comments on the way. I wanted to leave one entire one intact so you could see it, and we'll go from there. In fact, I'll probably post the whole video to the Greg and Donnie news page, just so you'll have it there, as well as when I post this to that also. Let's start again and see what you think. And if you have questions for me, you know, you can ask me on the Greg and Donnie News Show Facebook page. You can go to any of my Action Radio or Action Radio podcast pages, get a message to me. But Greg and Donnie News Show will be the best one to do that. Don't forget to go to our YouTube channel for other Greg and Donnie News shows, and to subscribe to our channel. And so that way we get enough votes, enough subscribers, we can do more things like live stream on YouTube and all kinds of other things that I want to do. All right, so there's my shameless plug for our news service for you here. All right, let's go through this and listen carefully. Now that you know what to listen for, see if this doesn't make more sense. And watch Kavanaugh never answer a question. I don't think he answered one question the entire time the way it was asked. All right, let's see if we can cue this up. And
Roe v. Wade. You've heard of that case, right?
I have, Senator.
Now, there are a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't. It's an emotional debate in the country. Is there anything in the Constitution about a right to abortion?
I'm going to stop right there. Why does he even have to ask that question? You know, you figure this whole Roe v. Wade case, and he goes into precedent when Kavanaugh talks about precedent, saying, well, we've established a precedent. There is no precedent for Roe v. Wade. There was no abortion ruling from the Supreme Court before this. So they're making this stuff up as they go. In other words, they reached the decision that they want. They wanted to impose Roe v. Wade on the country. I'm not going to discuss the merits of it. Like I say, we'll do that another time. This is just the power to even make that decision is what I'm talking about here. So the Supreme Court decided they wanted to impose the Roe v. Wade doctrine, where they established a right that doesn't exist in the Constitution, which can be done. I mean, there are, you know, the Constitution isn't limiting. It doesn't enumerate all of our rights. But the question is, if you're going to do that, are you following a logical, you know, procedure, and are you not inflicting pain on anybody else's rights? Well, you are, because abortion results in the death of a baby. And once you take that into account and you think about that, right, and you're also taking choice away from the man, from the father. So you've got 3 people involved in this, so it can't be considered a right, because a right only affects an individual. So we're really in a very complex area. And again, and there's lots of feelings either way. I'm not going to try and answer that now. But think about the fact that they didn't even think to go to the Constitution before they made Roe v. Wade, before the Supreme Court made that ruling.
Is anything written in the document?
Senator, the Supreme Court has recognized
the Supreme Court. Now, you're probably going to recognize my gestures from a few minutes ago. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's everything. So these guys, they go to law school, right? And so they believe that what they learn in law school, that lawyers are supreme to everybody else, judges are supreme to lawyers, and the Supreme Court is supreme to the Constitution. Their hierarchy is reversed. The way the laws work in this country, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Legislation, laws are under the Constitution. Judicial opinions are under the laws. Okay, that's how it works. That's how the supremacy of laws works. These guys have it backwards. They think the Supreme Court is on top, and below that are laws that they can challenge and do anything they want with, even though they don't have that power. And below that, somewhere is the Constitution.
The right to abortion since the 1973 Roe v. Wade case, and has reaffirmed it many times.
Look, my question is, did they find a phrase in the Constitution that said that the state cannot interfere with a woman's right to choose until medical viability occurs?
I need to sort of sum that up a little bit too. As I understand Roe v. Wade, medical viability is when a baby can live on its own outside mother, and so that's where Roe v. Wade, I guess, makes their cutoff. So there's a choice before that, but after that, you know, there's limitations. And again, I don't have the whole Roe v. Wade case memorized. But does the state have an interest in saving a life, you know, before what they're calling medical viability? And the Supreme Court says no. But my question is, how did they have the authority to make that decision? And the answer is they didn't.
And in the Constitution.
So the Supreme Court applying the liberty...
It's pretty simple. No, it's not, Senator Graham.
See?
Well,
those words.
I want to be very careful, because this is
Too careful.
a topic on which...
No, if you'll just follow me, I'll let you talk. But the point is,
got a great sense of
will
humor.
you tell me, yes or no, is there anything in the document itself talking about limiting the state's ability to protect the unborn before viability?
And that's anti-10th Amendment, okay? So anything, the Constitution says that anything not specifically delegated to the federal government is reserved to the states. So Roe v. Wade actually violates the 10th Amendment because it takes away the state's power to regulate something that is within their power, which is abortion, health, medical, all that kind of stuff. It's not in the Constitution any more than education or the FBI and National Police Force or any of a bunch of other things that we do is. So not only have they violated the Constitution by creating a right that affects 3 individuals, all right, they've now taken the state's power away, and they're saying that it takes a constitutional amendment to give the states back the power that they already have. This is why this is confusing.
Any phrase in the Constitution about abortion?
The Supreme Court has found it under the Liberty Clause, but you're right that specifically...
Is there anything in the Liberty Clause talking about abortion?
The Liberty Clause refers to liberty.
Okay.
That's going to be the biggest duh in the whole thing. Of course the Liberty Clause refers to liberty, but what is within liberty? Liberty is freedom from government intrusion, okay? And this is where you're going to find a very complex argument. Well, isn't that the most intrusive thing you can do to decide, you know, whether or not to have a child? Yeah, except for you're deciding for the child. Someone else is deciding for him. And that's where it gets very complicated. But the question is, and I'm going to throw out an issue here a little bit early. Liberty, what if the court decided that a living wage, $15 an hour indexed to inflation, is one of your liberties, all right? So say Hillary had won, I hate to think of that, say Hillary had won the election, She appoints justices that believe that a living wage is part of your liberty, that national health care is part of your liberty, that in order to enforce those things, they have to have a 70–80% tax rate on everybody, all right, because everybody has to pay their fair share, right? And that's part of your liberty is to be free from expenses. All right, think of the logic of that. And all it would take is 5 Supreme Court justices to say that that liberty of income, let's call it that, liberty of income is now a new principle. So you need to be able to have enough income to live the way they think you should be able to with a guaranteed wage. It would destroy the economy, all right? But they could call it liberty of income, and that would be a principle. And it couldn't be overturned because the legislature's already lost their power. Supreme Court doesn't recognize the Constitution and doesn't recognize the Congress as superior to them, which of course they are, all right? They think they can make this stuff up. But here's the other problem too, and this is a fault that goes all the way back to the American education system and what's going on all through our government. Everybody believes that the Supreme Court has these powers too. Nobody challenges them. When a judge was talking about DACA way back when, and he said that the whole idea that Trump can get rid of the DACA program. No, we're going to enforce it. The Trump administration has to show a reason to get rid of it. That's absolute nonsense. Judges don't make policy. But the real crime is not that this judge did something wrong, which of course they did, in ruling the president has to maintain a previous president's authority, which of course there's no basis for that. The problem is that people went along with it, that they think that this is okay, that they don't challenge these things and say, look, Judge, you're basically full of it, okay? You don't have the power to say that. And just say, this judge is an idiot. I'm not going to listen to that. And just go on with what would be the regular policy. All right, let's get back.
Last time I checked, liberty didn't equate to abortion. The Supreme Court said it did, but here's the point. What are the limits on this concept?
I want to talk about that. I know I'm going through this painstaking. If you want to just go back to the beginning and listen to the initial thing, I understand that. But I want to get some of these details out. What are the limits to this power that the Supreme Court has to create rights? And the answer, you already know. There are no limits. None. Zip. Zero. Nada. Zilch. There are no limits right now to the powers of the Supreme Court to create rights and do anything they want to run this country. That should scare you.
You had 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 judges. What are the limits on the ability of the court to find a penumbra of rights that apply to a particular situation?
I want to stop there for a second. Penumbra. That comes back, I think that's like an Oliver Wendell Holmes thing. In other words, they found, or one of the other justices, they found rights in the penumbra. In other words, somewhere in the Constitution, even though they're not specifically listed, in the overall umbrella, in the overall idea of liberty, these rights do exist. And that's where, now we can challenge whether they do or not. A right, you probably should get a definition of right. A right is something that you can do without government interference. All right. So the First Amendment, free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. Those are the things that are done without the government infringing on them. The Second Amendment, owning and carrying any firearm you want, is an uninfringible, untouchable right that no law can change. Now, the use of firearms is different, okay? But the Constitution says that the government cannot touch your right to own and carry a firearm. Those are rights, which must be done as an individual, and that your individual right cannot interfere with somebody else's individual right, okay? And so this is where it gets complicated. But do you have the right to free speech? Do you have the right to be offended? Yeah, that's not a right, okay? Do you have the right to health care? No, because it costs somebody else money, all right? So there's all these things, so the whole definition of rights is something we're going to have to go over, but that's what that penumbra. These guys understand that because they're lawyers, all right? They talk about this stuff all the time. All right, let's get going.
What are the checks and balances of people in your business, if you can find 5 people who agree with you, to confer a right, whether the public likes it or not, based on this concept of a penumbra of rights? What are the outer limits to this?
The Supreme Court, in the Glucksberg case, which is in the late 90s, Justice Kagan...
No, the answer is the Constitution, okay? The laws duly passed by Congress. Those are the limits.
About this at her hearing is the test that the Supreme Court uses to find unenumerated rights under the Liberty Clause of the Due Process Clause.
Wait, find unenumerated rights? We just go looking for them? What are they under? Oh, this one, I guess that one's there. Precedent. Precedent again. The precedent is the Constitution, all right? And, well, there's so much I can talk about. All right.
14th Amendment, and that refers to rights rooted in the history and tradition of the country so as to prevent...
Wait a minute. History and tradition? So this is where Lindsay Graham gets on him. He says, oh, so abortion is one of our great histories and traditions? I don't think so.
So let me ask you this. Is there any right rooted in the history and traditions of the country where legislative bodies could not intercede on behalf of the unborn before medical viability? Is that part of our history?
The Supreme Court precedent
See? He won't deal with the question. Not one.
recognized the right to abortion.
I'm just saying, what part of the history of our... I don't think our founding fathers, people mention our founding fathers, I don't remember that being part of American history.
I don't either.
So how did the court determine that it was?
The court applied the precedent that existed and found in
There is no precedent that existed. They made it up. Roe v. Wade doesn't have a precedent.
1973 that under the Liberty Clause.
Yeah, but before 1970, I mean, when you talk about the history of the United States, the court has found that part of our history is for the legislative bodies not to have a say about protecting the unborn until medical viability. Whether you agree with it or not, I don't think that's part of our history. So
he moves on here.
Fill in the blank. What are the limits of people in your business applying that concept to almost anything that you think to be liberty?
And that's the key question. What are the limits? And the answer is there are no limits. Liberty of income, like I mentioned earlier, they can make up that right. They can make up any right that they want and call it a right. And you lose the definition of what a right is. That's why I explained that earlier. A right is something that you do individually that the government can't touch. All right? Rights require action. You're not given something as a right. That might be a quote entitlement or a gift or a transfer or a whole bunch of other things. But it's not a right. You don't have a right to anything. You have a right to act without government interference. That's what a right is. And so, well, we'll see. Let's keep going.
And that is the concern that some have expressed about the concept of unenumerated rights.
Well, here's the concern I have. That you got one word that has opened up the ability for 5 people to tell everybody elected in the country, you can't go there.
That's what I was talking about before. The 5 people would be the 5 Supreme Court justices who could rule, because that's majority. 9 in the court, 5 is a majority. Majority rules, and that's, yeah, I would like to see 6, but that's another story. We'll worry about that later. But the thing is, what he's saying is that if the states, or any one particular state, wanted to change the rules on abortion and protect babies before, quote, medical viability going against Roe v. Wade, they would have no right to do that. So Roe v. Wade, this court decision and decisions are only, or opinions actually, only supposed to affect the parties involved in the case. That's another limitation. We'll talk about that later too. But because this became a national policy and people are going along with it when there's no reason to, because it's not a power that the Supreme Court ever had to make, this is why we get in the mess we're in now. And this is where all kinds of things have been legalized from the court. They've imposed gay marriage, they've imposed Obamacare, they've imposed a bunch of different things on this country under the penumbra of rights that they saw that maybe nobody else did in the Liberty Clause, just because it's something they wanted to do. So in other words, they figure out what they want to do, and then they retrace back to precedent to prove that it was okay for them to do it in the first place, when in reality, they're making it up.
That this is an off limits for in a democratic process. Whether you agree with Roe v. Wade or not, just think what could happen down the road if 5 people determine the word liberty means X. The only real check and balance is a constitutional amendment to change the ruling. Do you agree with that?
Senator Wright.
See? Silence. Yes, he does agree with that. And that's the problem. You cannot have a government run, you cannot have a constitutional republic, which we are guaranteed by the Constitution, by the way, a Republican form of government if the judges are in charge.
Not going to comment on potential constitutional amendments.
But, okay, if we pass a statute tomorrow in Congress saying that the Congress can regulate abortions before medical liability, wouldn't that fly in the face of Roe v. Wade?
So the Supreme Court has said that a woman has a constitutional right.
Doesn't that trump a statute?
The Supreme Court precedent.
So all of us could vote. Just 5 people have said liberty means right to the state has no interest here, compelling interest before medical viability. that we can pass all the laws we want, it doesn't matter because they fall. The only way we can change that is a constitutional amendment process. It requires 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the state. Is that a pretty correct legal analysis?
When the Supreme Court has issued a constitutional ruling,
then you can only change it by constitutional amendment. So here's the point. Whether you agree with Roe v. Wade or not, the reason some legal scholars object to this concept is breathtakingly unlimited. Whatever 5 people believe at any given time in history, in terms of the word liberty, they can rewrite our history and come up with a new history. And I think the best way for democracies to make history is to have the courts interpret the Constitution, be a check and balance on us, but not take one word and create a concept that is breathtaking in terms of its application to restrict the legislative process.
I'm going to hold it there. You can check back to the beginning. I'm about out of batteries here for this video. But that's where we stand right now. This didn't even make the news. None of this did. But now you know. You are better informed. You realize what's going on and how critical this is to reform our Supreme Court. Go back, check it over. Share this video, please, with everybody you can, because the real problem that is being hidden from you is not what happened to Brett Kavanaugh back in high school. That's an individual thing that belongs in law enforcement. That does not belong necessarily in our hearings. Well, we'll see. And I think the hearings are over. They should have moved on. It's too late to bring it up now. And I have trouble believing in any kind of accusation right before a vote or an election. Anyway, especially when they disappear so quickly after the election or the vote. But the thing is, think about this. Think about the unlimited power of the Supreme Court to do whatever they want. And the fact, I'll say what else is breathtaking, is the fact that nobody else notices. Nobody else is talking about it. Everybody's okay, except Lindsay Graham, Senator Graham, with the concept of a Supreme Court creating any right they want and imposing it on the rest of the country, and it would take a constitutional amendment every time anyone wanted to change a ruling or an opinion of the Supreme Court. With that, I will leave you. I'm Greg Penglis. This is the Greg and Donnie News Show, and I'll be back with Donnie very soon with more interviews, more discussions, more topics in the news. We'll probably get to this one, I'm sure, at some point. But again, Lindsey Graham, Day 3 of the confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh. And again, watch our YouTube channel, please, Greg and Donnie News Show YouTube channel, Greg and Donnie News Show Facebook page. I have my own Action Radio Facebook page and the Action Radio podcast page, which has all my recordings from my WEBY shows. And with that, I will leave you, and I'll be back very soon.